Speak up, mate.
Hello. Is this one working?
Yeah.
No, we're speaking.
Hello. All right.
Sound engineer is in.
Hello.
Yeah.
Well, welcome everyone to Topic Night. So, before we get going, just a couple of... Good now? Start again. Welcome to Topic Night. So, before we get going, just a couple of small announcements. We've got the first twilight on the 3rd of November, not far away now, so hoping to get a few more cruising boats out for that. Yay. The progressive dinner on the 13th of November, so I think there's a registration out for that, so get your names down. And then Roto Olympics was organised by the power section, but cruising sailors are very welcome as well. It's a bit of fun on the beach in Thompson's. So those are the main things coming up, and then a quick plug for the Quindalup cruise, 15th of January. Start thinking about that one because it's a long one. So on to the business of tonight. We'd like to welcome Phil Hearse, our Commodore, who's going to tell us all about his sailing experiences. So Phil and Robbie met in Papua New Guinea when Phil had a boat and no money. And Robbie had the money.
Nothing's changed. But he doesn't have a boat anymore.
But after 46 years and more than 100,000 miles sailing, they're still together and were never in disagreement.
I don't believe it.
Because Phil's the captain, but Robbie is the admiral. Admirals always win out. So Phil skippered his boats, often co-skippering with his son Josh on many races, such as the Transatlantic race, the Sydney to Hobart, the Sydney to Auckland, as well as sailing many of the world's oceans and seas. Phil has held Grade 5 and Grade 4 master tickets and is an accredited safety auditor. His presentation today is a series of short stories about his and Robbie's sailing experiences in places like Papua New Guinea, the Baltic, the Mediterranean and the Caribbean. So looking forward to hearing all about it, Phil.
Thank you, Martin. Oops, somebody's interrupted my slides. It's wonderful to see so many people, and so many of you here are my friends, and hopefully others will be my friends as time goes on. I particularly want to welcome my family, Robbie, who many of you know, who is and Joshy, my great sailing partner and technical sailing advisor, my son Shannon, and grandson Maxie, who's here, so it's just terrific. I'd also like to welcome Colin and Sandy Burns, and the little story here is that under an amazing coincidence, Robbie met Sandy earlier this week, and we used to work with them more than nearly 50 years ago at Bougainville, and some of these stories are about Bougainville, so amazing coincidence. So welcome. I'd like to start by acknowledging our traditional owners. Fremantle Sailing Club acknowledges the traditional custodians throughout Western Australia and their continuing connection to the land, water and community. We pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal communities and their cultures, and to elders past, present and emerging. Now a few years ago, a fellow who we know and love very much, Rob Thomas, he gave a talk on his life with boats, and I thought it's nice to continue that tradition. There is I don't know if you've ever heard of a guy called C6 Steve, but he's a singer, American singer, and one of the songs he wrote says, "I started off with nothing and I still got most of it left." so he's definitely a sailor and a boat owner.
Or a boat owner's wife.
Boat owner's wife. So this is actually a photo of a painting of where I was brought up, which is in Counter Bay in South Australia. And where we lived was right overlooking, it was that view, looking out and the old fishermen Bill and George there, who were mullet fishermen. My dad, he had an 18-foot a bondwood boat in those days, it was a plywood boat with a Villiers inboard engine that you started with a strap, and he would take me around a place called the Bluff, and we would go out fishing for snook in those days. And then Dad bought me a 12-foot fiberglass boat with a 3.5 horsepower Seagull engine, and I learned very young in life that the frustrations associated with small, unreliable outboards. But I always wanted my own yacht, and I went to Papua.
You've not got a speaker.
Yeah, that's all.
Sorry?
Okay.
Yeah, it's on good. Yeah.
Sorry.
My micromanager's onto me. So I went to New Guinea when I was about 20,
If you're
and
lucky.
I got a job at the copper mine at Bogomil. But I always wanted a boat, always wanted it. And so when I was working there, the Canadian cruising yacht came through. It was 50-footer, and I got onto that, went across to Madang, got off of that boat, and found a yacht that I wanted to buy. And this was her. So there she is. When Max was young, he saw a photograph of me like that, and he said, "That can't be Granddad, he's got hair."
Boy, has he got hair, yeah.
So we set about, I set about rebuilding this boat. Now, I'm going to tell you briefly the story how Robbie and I met. If I tell you it'll take 2 minutes, if Robbie tells you it'll take half an hour. But Robbie was working as a volunteer services officer in East Timor at the time of the uprising there in 1975. And she had to get out, and that same Canadian boat went through and picked her up and another lady and took them to the safety of Bali. Well, along the track there, the crew were talking to Robbie, and they sort of said, "Well, you would like this guy Phil, he's got a lot of the same thoughts as you." So with a bit of snail mail and a couple of propositions, Robbie came to New Guinea to meet me on a blind date. So if that ain't gutsy, I don't know. So we took off. Well, first of all, I had the boat on the worst lee shore you could ever imagine. It was in the trades, and the waves were smashing onto the shore. So I picked her up from the airport. I took her out, put her in the dinghy, and I said, "Okay, Robbie, I'm going to push you out through the ocean, through the waves, and then I'm going to swim out, and I want you to go do as well as you can to get to the boat, and I'll help you make it out." So by the time I got out there huffing and puffing, she'd already got the boat in, she had tied it up, she was sitting in the cockpit seat waiting for me to get there. And I thought, what's going on here? So the first night at sea, and I'm not sure how many of you guys have travelled or sailed in New Guinea. I know Dave's done a lot through that area, but it's calms and squalls, calms and squalls. So this little boat, this beautiful little boat, by the way, she was an extended trade rig, 30 foot long, and almost no room in her whatsoever. But she was just a delightful little boat. And we had twin forestays, and number 2 and the number 3 hanged on. And I said to Robbie, one night we're going out and there's a squall coming over. I said, "Can you go and change the number 3 for the number 2? And I'm thinking, this is going to be good. You know? So up she goes, she changes it, comes back to the cockpit. And I thought, what's going on here? Well, I found out quite some time later that she had sailed a little bluebird. This is a 22-foot bluebird. She sailed it from Sydney to Cairns. Now, Sydney to Townsville. If that's not epic, I don't know what is. You know, that's fantastic. And just to top it off, she'd also done Sydney Hobart. So anyway, after the sail changing, I said, I'm feeling a bit hungry. So we're out there. I got this tiny little 1-burner stove, and down she went. And about half an hour later, she came up with spaghetti bolognese. And I said, I'm going to marry you. What do you say, darling?
Not in this lifetime.
So only a couple of months later, in this little boat, not that one, next one, we hit the worst conditions I think we've ever hit in our lives of sailing. And it was in New Guinea, and there was a cyclone a bit further south. And it was very unusual to get these conditions in New Guinea, but it was terrible. And we're in Madang, coming back across the Vidian Straits that are renowned for their roughness. And we hit really harsh conditions for 3 days. Just about everything was wiped off our deck. We had water above the floorboards. The diesel tanks had burst from the pressure of them. And so not only water, but water and diesel sloshing around in the boat. We had the engine had stopped, and we split the main, so we managed to get her in to an old anchorage that we'd been before, called Weeto Island. And when we got up there, the conditions were too rough for any other boats to be around. So about 3 or 4 days later, a vessel called the Paulus came in with Captain Steve, a missionary boat, and his father on it, the father of the missionary. And then they towed us around to an anchorage on Weeto Island where it had been before. And then we started walking up towards the plantation, Langby plantation, where Dickie Doyle, the plantation owner, was. And a couple of the local guys came up and they started running away from us. And we thought, what's going on here? And when we got up, Dickie said, oh, you guys have been reported missing at sea. You're supposed to be dead. These guys think you're ghosts. So we assured him we weren't ghosts and we drank beer.
First we rang our parents and assured them we were alive.
Yeah, we did that. We did that. So our next boat is this beautiful 40-foot Yuan pine cutter called Sika. And she was built in Hobart by Jock Muir in 1964. And her whole interior had been fitted out subsequent to that by Norman Wright in Brisbane. She's a wonderful boat. Well, at that stage, Robbie and I flew down from New Guinea, and with Shan, who was 9 months old at the time, and the 3 of us set off to sail the boat back to the Solomon Islands. So I'd made sort of the naive mistake. I got a tiller master to steer this boat. You know, it was just so woefully inadequate. It was a little sort of useless anyway. So we had to hand steer the boat all the way across to the Coral Sea. So with the 3 of us, we were getting meals, and we were steering, and we were navigating by the stars, and we were looking after Shan. But we still did 1,000 miles across her in 7 days, which I think was quite phenomenal, you know, to do that. So we got there, and look, she was so hard to steer. Her weather helm was so severe and her rudder too small that we had a line around the tiller to a winch, and that was how we were steering, trying to steer the thing, you know. So we got into New Guinea, and Colin and Sandy will remember this this anchorage beautifully. This is called Lolaho Beach, and there she is there. Well, what I used to do, I got my old jobs back, and in the mornings I would jump in the dinghy, take it to shore, and then Robbie and Shan would jump into the water, and here we go. They'd jump into the water, and then we'd go into they'd go in, pick up the dinghy, and go for a walk around and bring it out. Well, Robbie noticed that there was a fellow stalking her or following her, and I've been up there as a single guy before, and I had great friends with the Rorovanan people, the Western Britain people, and the Bougainvilleans, and so I talked to these guys. I said, hey, this guy's following Robbie. Can you? It was a Highlander. Can you look after him for me, please? And these are guys, coastal guys. They don't like the Highlanders, And they said, sure, we'll look after him for you. And guys, you don't know the end of the story, but 2 weeks later they found him chopped up in a 44-gallon drum. So that was justice, Papua New Guinea style. So
Well, when you queried it, they said, well, it was Robbie or him.
yeah. Oops, I'll go back. So,
Yeah.
so we put Aries gear onto this boat, and we enlarged the rudder in New Guinea, and we never had to hand steer again when we were under sail. So just, I wanted to get our guys used to sailing young, and I've always been into delegating. So there's Shan on the helm, and Josh turned out to be a rigger. He's up the rig, and there's Shan bringing the boat in. I delegated the washing down the boat to Robbie. That was pretty. But my mum and dad, they weren't too keen on us two wandering around the Pacific in this boat with a young child. So they bought us a new contraption, this fandangled contraption, called a radio direction finder. I don't know if any of you guys have used radio direction finders, but what you do, so it's about the size of a printer now, and you have it down below, or how we used to do it, and what it does, it picks up the null point from a radio signal, so you've got an aerial on the top, and you rotate it until you get the least signal, and then, like Robbie would do that, she'd yell out to me on the helm, I'd say what the course was, and from that we'd work out the direction of where, like, might be Bundaberg, or like coming back might be Brisbane, and so you get a cocked hat about half the size of Western Australia. It didn't help us much, but Mum and Dad felt good about it. So
Well, we got Shani safely home.
we did. So we're getting ready to leave Honiara on our way back, and this rather dubious looking character came up to us and he said, "Look, I'll give you 20 grand if you pick up a parcel of Pocklington Reed." And Pocklington is sort of between halfway across. And so we left from Honiara, had a nice sail back, got in towards Cairns. As we got into Cairns, a gale came through, and everything that we had neatly in our cupboards was on the floor, literally, including our passports and stuff. So we got into Cairns, and the customs and immigration guys met us there in Cairns. They escorted us in, boarded the boat, and they said, "Show us your passports," and we dug them out from under this mess on the floor, gave them to them. And they said, "Okay, you guys are right to go." And we said, "Aren't you going to check us out a bit more?" And they said, "No, we know you didn't pick up the drugs off Pocklington."
But you know.
That's our kids learning to sail.
Their first sailboat.
So now we're in Darwin, and this is a little Peterson 30. She's a gorgeous little boat, and obviously we had a mishap here. But we're out in a race, and it was out near Bathurst Island. It was about 4:30 in the morning, of course, when it always happens, and about 20-25 knots, something like that. And a new helmsman came on, took over the helm, broached it, and the mast just went over the side, and we had the spinnaker up, and all you could see, it was just surreal, because the spinnaker's shimmering with the masthead lights still on under the water. Anyway, we managed to get it back on board, but I'm not sure if any of you guys, I'm sure you have, been on a boat that's lost its mast, but the motion is terrible, really terrible, and so all the rest of the crew was sick. I was the only one who could helm the boat, and so I motored it back with a bottle of port by my side, and got it back to Darwin okay. Now, Tony Hawk,
Yeah.
you know this one.
Yes.
This is Quasar. She was a Colt 35 that we brought down here to Perth, and we sailed her up around Darwin first of all, then brought her down here, and you subsequently bought her, mate.
That's right.
Yeah, she's a good boat.
Great boat.
Yeah, great boat. Great boat.
I did a great paint job on them.
So now we're sort of moving into more modern boats in our era, and this is a Benadog, a Beneteau 430, and I went to the Sydney Boat Show, and I saw this boat, and I said to Robbie, "We've got to have this boat. We just got to have it today." And she said, "Right, are you sure it'll sail all right?" I said, "Oh, it doesn't really matter, you know. We've got to have it." So we went across to Sydney, picked her up, and sailed her up the Whitsundays. That was all fun. So
Will was behind our bar, the
yep,
whole way.
yep. So we're up there and had a mate on board, and as always happens, you run out of beer, you know, what it's like. So we had to get back to Early Beach, but it was to windward. And by the time we got into Early Beach, Robbie said, "Well, are you satisfied now?" And I said, "No." I said, "We are going straight back to Sydney, and we're going to sell this boat." and that's exactly what we did.
Was that bad?
Yeah, who'd you make bring it home?
Well, with this boat, this one now, which I'll tell you a few stories about, every year Josh would take it up to the Whitsundays, and every year I'd have to get him, "Bring my bloody boat back." And suddenly there'd be all this storm sound, you know, "Oh, the wind's pretty bad up here."
Stay a little bit longer.
So this is Antia. She was a Beneteau 45 F5 and a completely different machine. Really fantastic. Now, this is a true story that it's sort of a, I don't know what you call it, mono construction or what it is, but it didn't depend on the bulkhead for its integrity. And we used to torture this poor old girl so much. We had barber haulers on just about every line you could think of. And to say, true story, you could fit, when we were really going to windward and it was full on, you could fit a 50-cent piece on its end between the bulkhead and the cabin sole or the cabin. And then when you're running, you couldn't fit it in sideways. Sort of thing. I used to sleep in the aft cabins when we were off watch, and you could hear the splintering of the wood around the engine box. You know, as the poor old girl was just being tortured. But she was beautiful, and that's at the end of Sydney Hobart race that we did. Now, so then I said to Josh, "Hey Josh, let's do a two-handed across to Auckland." And he said, "Okay, okay, let's do it." So I'm just showing this photo of the spinning got in Sydney Harbour. But which seems to be a bit of a pattern with us, is that day one, the cockpit got flooded and our autopilot went out of commission because the mechanism was there. And we did have a wind vane on, but the wind vane didn't work very well. We put it on for the race, so it really didn't work. So we had to hand steer it basically all the way across again. We got going along one evening, and I said, "Hey Josh, let's put the spinnaker up." And he said, "No, Dad, don't put the spinnaker up." I said, "Come on, let's put it up." So put the spinnaker up. About 2 hours later, it's getting dark, the wind's piped up, and we're about 30 degrees off course.
Going fast.
Hey?
Going fast.
Going fast. And I said to him, "Hey Josh, I better get the spinnaker down." And he said, "Well, you put it up." So I went up. I couldn't get it down. There's no way, you know. So then he said, "Oh, okay." So he went up and got the thing down for me. So youth and agility won out on that one, I'll tell you. So we were going around we got around the top, coming down the east coast of New Zealand, and it was really blowing like hell. And I saw Joshy, this little figure hunched over the wheel, and I said, "How are you, mate?" And he said, "Dad, I only been going to windward for an hour and already I fucking hate it." And then as we're going down the east coast, it eased a bit. I went down for a shower, and next thing I hear, Josh, Dad, I need you upstairs. And I said, no, I've been working hard this whole trip, I want a break. He said, I need you upstairs. So I said, oh, all right, and I come up and there's an island right in front of us because we needed to tack, but because we
were locked down under the pole.
Yeah, and we had 2 headies up and needed 2 people to tack the boat, so anyway, so we survived that.
Hold on, you've forgotten the fact that you had to get up there and check the boat with no clothes on.
So that's Josh and I going into Auckland, and Robbie was there on the finish line to greet us, which is just beautiful. Yeah. So this is a boat some of you will be familiar with, Antigua Blue. She was a bit of a stunner, a Hansi 461. We had it built in the factory in Greifswald in Germany. Joshy went there and commissioned it for us. We went across there. We sailed her through the Baltic, up the North Sea, down to England and across Biscay, down to the Med, into the Med, down the Canaries and across the Atlantic, through the Caribbean up to America. So that photograph there is in Cowes, and we tried to get in there and it was blowing a bit and the tide was difficult and I was really struggling to get a tyre up against the wall. And suddenly a lady comes running down. And I thought, oh beauty, somebody's going to give me a hand. And she says, you got the Union Jack upside down.
And then they didn't look like it's coming into their yacht club. We had to go to the lesser one.
So we're in a place called Bornholm, which is part of Denmark. It's an island in the Baltic off Denmark. And there was a gale coming in. We got in there to shelter. And next thing, this sail training vessel tries to pull up alongside us. And we knew it would bloody crush us, basically. Anyway, we're just wondering what to do with it. This little guy comes run down the wharf. He's got a 30-footer. Comes around the wharf and it's not in his best Swedish swearing, and told him to piss off, get out of there. So anyway, we got to know this guy quite well, and we enjoyed many rums and many wines with them.
You fell from how far to each boat?
Yeah. So I'll tell the rest of the story on that one in a sec. But I know, back again. From there, we motored up across the Kiel Canal. I don't know if you guys know the Kiel Canal, but it connects the Baltic, Germany, with the North Sea, with the North Sea, and it's about 60 nautical miles long. And the Germans built it in the late 1800s to get their warships through, and so they could avoid the gauntlet, running the gauntlet of the Kattegat. And Kiel Yacht Club is in Germany, but it is still a British enclave there in Germany. It's this little enclave left over from the war. So we went across through the Kiel Canal, which was a great experience, all the locks and things to get there. And you get to a place called Cuxhaven, which is on the Atlantic coast. And it was, there was a lot of weather around at the time. And Cuxhaven Harbour was virtually completely blocked out. Anyway, we got a berth, and you're about 10 boats all ramped up next to each other. And this guy comes on board and he looks down at our chart table and he sees this card from this guy that was...
We towed him before.
Sorry?
We already towed the boat.
Oh, we towed
I
that
forgot
boat.
that. We towed them.
With a little penny.
Excuse me. And he looked at the card and he said, you know this guy? We said, yeah, we've been in Bornholm. He said, he just sold his business to Vodafone. He's one of the richest men in Sweden. We had no idea. This guy with his 30-footer. No idea. So I was in Cuxhaven, and I said to the harbour master, I just about had enough here, you know, been here long enough. And I said, we'd like to get out. And Cuxhaven, the River Elbe is the entrance into Cuxhaven, and you get these massive tide against wind effects through it. So I said, I'd like to go. And he said, sure, that's fine. He said, but a freighter went out of here a couple of weeks ago under these conditions and actually stove its bow in. So, but you can do it, it's okay. We finally got out from there, and we're in the North Sea. It's dank, it's grey, it's foggy, not too rough at the time, I think, but you couldn't see anything basically. And I was down below. Josh and Robbie were up on watch, and they heard this noise, and it got this motor. It got louder and louder and louder, and looked on the radar, couldn't see anything, so I started to get pretty worried when you can't see anything in this noise coming loud to you. And then about 200 metres away, a helicopter broke out of the fog and
At
came.
the spreader level.
Yeah. So that's really what it was. You know, it was a chopper, but it sure gave us some fright. So then we got down to England and made the passage across the Bay of Biscay. So at that stage, just Robbie and I, so it was late in the season. It's just like a continuous series of fronts coming through, and so you just sit there and wait until you can get away, and you go on the back of the front. By the time you get down, it's 600 miles across Biscay to Spain. By the time you get there, you've got another one up your bum, basically. So it was pretty interesting, really. But but this one now, whoops, that one. So one morning we're not too far off of La Corona, going into Spain, and I said to Robbie, hey, come on out here, come and look at this, and she comes out, and we're right under the bow of the Queen Mary, and I mean it, right under the bow of it, and she panicked and said, oh, this is the end. And so I explained to her that they were sitting there. I'd phoned up the bridge, radioed up the bridge, and told them that we wanted to get through. They said that they were just waiting for morning to bring their people into port, and it was perfectly okay for us to sail into their van.
He timed it to the minute till he got me up to change watch.
So that's Rock of Gibraltar in the background there. Gibraltar is, it's windy. What's the matter?
Rhonda.
Yeah, Rhonda came on. It's windy either from the west or from the east. You know, it blows like hell, actually. And Tarifa, which is just down the coast, is reputedly the windiest place in the world, and it's the windsurfing capital of the world. I can't see how Fremantle can be taken out of that position personally. But we sailed into Gibraltar, and we had an escort. It was fantastic. We had the British Navy, the Spanish Navy, the Moroccan Navy, and the Portuguese Navy, all escorting us in. So we got in and berthed, and there had been a major drug bust on this one. And it had been a yacht that had sailed across the Atlantic, and it had a whole mass of heroin fiberglassed into its hull. And so when we got in there, they had arrested the captain and the crew of the boat, but fortunately it wasn't for us.
Wasn't your boat, that's it.
No, thank God.
So we sailed down the Red, Canaries, and we raced this boat across the Atlantic and in the Ark, and it was great going. So now we're in the Caribbean. We got into St. Lucia, and once again, this is a true story. Into St. Lucia, eased off the backstay, and next to us is a yacht, Southern Princess. Southern Princess is a Beneteau 57, and John and Irene on board, and Aussies. And John said, "Hey, what are you throwing stuff at us for?" You know, what had happened? This is unbelievable. Was that when we eased the tension off the main, a hunk of spreader had fallen from our spreader onto their boat next door. Yeah, it was about that size, and so you can imagine what that would have done if we'd lost that at sea, you know. Yeah. So we in the Caribbean, then we had an issue, and excuse me.
They found the drugs.
No, they never found it.
We had a Yamaha diesel and the cone gear failed in it. Now what that meant was that we could only motor backwards. And it was going to be 4 months to replace the cone gear. So what do we do? You know, do we give it all up and go away? Or do we motor backwards and sail everywhere we go? So we said, well, we've got sails, we've got an anchor, let's go. So we're in a place called Marigot Bay. Marigot Bay is on St Lucia, and it's one of the most beautiful places you'll ever see. And they say that the English stuck palm fronds on the top of their mast to hide from the French when they were in there. So we motor backwards out of Marigot Bay. We start sailing, and then there's a wind patch a bit out. So we put the motor on, start sailing backwards, and the Coast Guard from St Vincent comes out. And they say, "We hear you guys are in trouble." And we had a guy on board, Tony Scholl, at the time. And he said, no, mate, we always do it like this in Australia. So we spent the next 4 months sailing around the Caribbean without an engine, quite honestly. And it was a good experience, you know. We were taken in turns to sail the boat into anchorages. Sometimes if the risk was too much, we'd sit further out. But sometimes we're out with the super yachts. And the super yachts, interesting bunch as to just how lonely a lot of those guys are, because they rely entirely on their crews, and they really don't have a lot of fun, a lot of them.
The crews do.
The crews do.
We got to know the crews really well.
Yeah, we did. So this is a place in, now we've fast forward to Dominican Republic, and this is a place called Puerto Plata, and it's a really flash-looking casino. So we pulled in there. There weren't many people around. When we checked in, about every department known to man came in. There was fisheries, and there was customs, and there was immigration, and there was whatever. And the fee for everybody was $20 and 2 cans of Coke. That's what we had to pay. So we got in there, and then that evening we went up to the casino, and not many people around. Michelin restaurant, and it was just lovely, and there was a tits and bum show, and you know, that was all great. And then, so we went back to the boat, wondering really what's going on here. And I got up about 5 a.m. the next morning, and the marina was full of like cigarette boats with 4 300s horsepowers on them. So it was a money laundering exercise that was going on there. That's going to San Juan. It looked scary, and I thought it was pretty scary going in there, to be honest. Now, we went in there, and this was our first place of check-in into the US, and we were really told that checking into the US was a pretty hairy experience, and you were going to get harassed and the like. So we got in there on a Friday evening, made contact with customs, and they said, just come around on Monday morning and see us, you know. It was exactly the opposite to what we expected. So we had a nice couple of days in San Juan before we went and checked in, didn't we, Robbie?
And we got our 3-month visa.
Yeah, we got our visa easy. Amazing. This story here is a little bit harder to tell, you know, if you do enough stuff, at some stage you'll stuff it up and you'll get it wrong. But don't stop doing it, whatever you do, keep doing it. So this is a place called White Key in the Bahamas. It looks pretty benign. Getting into these little keys is always a challenge, and because the sand shift. Anyway, we got in there, and like where the dinghy is, there's a row of sand hills, and it's maybe 50 metres across to the Atlantic Ocean. So we came in, we had a G&T or whatever we had. Went back to the boat, starting to get a little bit dark, and I said to Robbie, do you want another G&T? She said, yeah, sure. So I went down, made it. By the time I came back, I said, Robbie, we're dragging, and we'd been there for 2 tide changes and hadn't moved. But where you see the island in the background, there's a reef that comes a long way out of that, and next thing we know, we're on the reef. And we got pounded, really pounded. The gunwale was in the water. The
mast was pumping.
Yeah, mast was getting smashed, well, pounded. The boat was just being lifted and bang, lifted and bang. So I said to Robbie, we're going to do everything we can to save this boat, you know. So Robbie went up to the bow, but he couldn't walk along the deck, so she did it inside, got up through the forward hatch to sort the anchor out, or try to get the anchor in. Then, after we'd been pounded for about an hour, the boat suddenly rolled upright, and we thought, this is, you know, we're going to the death rollers here. And we actually floated across the reef into deep water. So as soon as we were in this position to do so, I had 4 anchors, I dropped them all out because the currents were still very strong through there. And ripped all the floorboards up. And there was no water in the boat. Right? And the construction of that boat is epoxy foam sandwich, so coherently it's very strong. It had a steel frame right through it, and the whole thing was pinned together with the rig down. So it was an extremely strong boat. It had from the hull, it had a cast iron kill section, and then a lead section bolted onto the bottom of it. So the next morning, with a strong current going through and hanging onto a rope, I dived down, and the hull to cast iron section was fine, but the actual bulb was bent over. You know, these huge kill bolts had been bent significantly. So we sat there in there on the wrong side of the reef with the Bahama banks behind us.
For 4 days.
Yeah, for about 4 days, and just waited, and then the right tide came along. In the meantime, I went out with the dinghy and plotted a course with bottles to find the deepest patch out. And when the tide was right in our hearts and our mouth, we motored out through this passage out into the Atlantic Ocean. So from there, then we had to get across the Bahama banks, which is, they can go for 60 miles at 3 to 10 metres sort of depths through there. And then it's the Florida Straits, and Florida Straits has been notorious because it's a wind against current place too. And there was a big elephant in that room that night when Rob and I were out there, because we didn't know if the keel was going to fall off, essentially. Anyway, when we got to America, we put on a ship and sent it home to Brizzy, had the keel fixed, and then we brought around from Brisbane. Okay, now the Condili that most of you know. She's tucked in there in Turkey. Yeah, in Fethiye, that's right. So we sailed a lot of miles in her, and pretty much without too much stress. Pretty good sailing, except that halfway across the Atlantic, the rudder tried to detach itself from the boat, and that wasn't so uneventful. But Joshy came to the fore and patched it up and got us into St Lucia. So that was great. We sailed her. It was pretty much the same areas, the same course and routes that we'd sailed at Antigua. So, except that we had it delivered to the UK first of all, and then from Hamburg we sailed her down across Biscay, and then we went all the way into Turkey. We spent a couple of years in Turkey, and on and off living on the boat, and it was really, truly beautiful living there. Really fantastic. So I'm getting close to the end now, and you can see how calm this is. This is the Mediterranean, and once again, the word of a lie, the stars were pinpoints. They weren't shimmers, they were pinpoints in the sea. To put cruising into perspective, on Condili, on this boat alone, we've done 2,867 motoring hours. Now, bearing in mind that we have a generator to power the boat, that's equivalent to about 18,000 sea miles of motoring. And it's about 80% of the circumference of the world we've done under motor on this boat, let alone all the sailing and stuff we've done. So look, you know, and we have been blessed with generally fair seas and good winds, and with someone like Robbie as my lifelong partner to come sailing with, and Joshy for his help in that as we went along. It's been just fantastic. Robbie keeps saying about Condili, I love this boat like she's a person, and you know, really between us we've been privileged to sail to so many places. I'm just going to show just roll through a few slides of where we've been. But I'm going to finish with a saying also that probably many of you know, and that is that I've spent most of my money on boats, women and booze, and the rest I wasted. So that's going through the Corinth Canal in Greece. That's Marigot Bay, the place I talked about earlier in St Lucia, which is just unbelievable. The magnificent berthing in Malta, just exquisite. This is tucked in Posto under Mount Etna in Sicily. You see the snow, it was cold. We got some big storms through there while we were waiting to get out. Yeah, it was really a wonderful place. Getting breakfast cooked in Turkey for us, the pancakes cooked. Robbie and Gümüşlük in Turkey, really a lovely spot. Kalymnos in Greece.
He's forgotten the fact that we came back to the boat and we'd taken it away.
Not deliberately.
Yeah, for all of you guys who have sailed in Greece, you know the Meltemi, which comes in from the north and can be pretty rough. There's Robbie having a good time in the Meltemi. This is still in Kalymnos, this is Vati. There. A place called Knidos in Turkey, which is a 4,000-year-old civilization, and you can really only get to it by boat. Castellarizen, which is Greece, and it's only a few kilometres off the coast of Turkey. leading up to the ark race. Going across the Atlantic, tired-looking girl. Hitchhiker that joined us, and in fact was on board on the Atlantic for a few days until its flock found it and came in, picked it up, and they flew off, and a couple of them flew around the boat. It was quite an emotional experience.
He was trying to climb down the companion
Yeah.
These are the pitons in St Lucia. I better not go too much into this story, or Robbie will get too excited.
here?
No, I can't hear her yelling.
This is the traditional way of fishing in Paul and Keris. You guys know. Robbie in her favourite spot. She spent weeks there. The young dog teaches the old dog new tricks. And can do it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill. That was really inspiring. Like a little bottle of your favourite tipple, I think. Thank you very much. Any questions for Phil? Yes. Sure, there's loads, really. We were just asking the bar.
Yes, Ollie. I guess we do what we love, Ollie.
Never stop, Ollie. You haven't, and we won't.
Hey, Anita.
Where's the name
from
Billy actually?
Sorry?
Yes, that's a good question. Where's the name from Billy?
Do you want to tell the story, Robbie?
She already knows. She's
Okay.
sitting here.
For us to know.
Okay. Phil was born in, am I allowed to talk? You are
Does she normally ask permission?
It's very polite.
Phil was born in South Australia, in Encounter Bay, Victor Harbour. And when we were searching for a name, Anteater was sort of Anteater, which was, you know, we all know what an Anteater is, and we had 2 of those. And so we're searching for a more Australian name, and thank you.
Sorry.
And so we started searching for an Australian Aboriginal name, an Indigenous name. And we came up with the legend of Condilli. And the legend of Condilli is from the area that Phil was born, which is the Coorong in South Australia. And Condilli was a very powerful Dreamtime Aboriginal man who had the power of fire. So he could create heat, he could create light, and he could cook food. And there was a corroboree in what the Indigenous people believed was the Inland Sea, and they believed that the Coorong was the end of the Inland Sea, and it went right up into, I think at that time, the Europeans believed that the Cape York was connected right through from the, I'm talking too much. Anyway, Condilli, there was a corroboree. I can see my children. There was a corroboree in the Coorong, and Condilli was ambushed by other tribes, and they stuck spears into him, and he jumped into the Coorong, or the Great Inland Sea, and he boiled it because all of the fire came out through his neck. So he went out to the river, out into the Great Southern Ocean, back into the Coorong, back out again, back out. So he created 4 miles to the Murray, and he became the Great Southern Right Whale. And that is why the Coorong has never flourished since white man came here, in the belief of the Aboriginal people of that time. So we call Condilli after the Great Southern Right Whale.
Steve?
I mean, the Ark, we haven't been lucky enough to do that. We hear a lot about it. It seems to be one of the famous big, rallies in particular in the world. And I'm just wondering if, and when we were talking about the organisation for our event like Exmouth and stuff, I was just wondering, Phil, if there's anything you think we should learn from, or we could use, or as a role model, any learnings really, particularly from a rally like the Arc, right from big rallies we have in Australia, like our Exmouth we just had in Bali and those sort of ones.
Ended in the Caribbean.
Not
Yeah.
That's the best bit of advice. No, mate, you do it great. Exmouth is fantastic.
Agreed.
The Arc's no better.
Agreed.
The Caribbean would be nice.
Yeah. Diversion.
It's a long way, halfway around the world from Perth to the Caribbean.
It's a wee bit longer.
Fire cocos, yeah.
Oh, another one at the back there?
Hey,
That's a good
very
question.
good question, eh? No, we're sort of enjoying what we're doing. I don't know. We might go, I don't know. Yeah. What about you guys? You going to go? We did that around Indonesia.
We'll come up to Singapore and help you get Prime Factor home.
Okay, well I think the bar's open, so I'm sure Phil will be quite happy to answer lots of extra questions. So thank you very much, Phil. That was really great. Thank you.